Today we have the biggest patch for Dune Awakening since launch, and there are some really huge PvE and PvP changes that can really help change a decent portion of the game for better, especially for PvE players. This patch has been delayed until Wednesday or Thursday, but make sure to do some of the things I'm going to mention in this video, because otherwise it could cost you a bunch of extra time and or resources. That way you can get the head start on what's coming up. Now the first thing I want to talk about is vehicles, because this is a complete meta change, especially in terms of the deep desert. Now, one of the big things, colliding ornithopters will now get knocked back to separate them, which hopefully will prevent those instances where you're flying through the deep desert, someone just boosts right in front of you and tries to basically knock away or stop your momentum. Especially if you're getting chased and rocketed, there will basically be a shield on top of them and everyone will bounce off one another. This is especially going to help griefing carrier ornithopters, meaning if you come out with a carrier, you have a much better chance now after this patch of not getting completely destroyed if someone starts shooting at you. Now the balancing changes are some of the biggest ones. So you can see they're actually decreasing some of the deterioration rate for a lot of the things that we like to use and are annoying to repair. And with the repair glitch so-called coming to an end, hopefully pretty soon, this is going to really help you out. Big ones to note are half scout ornithopter wings deterioration rate, meaning those wings just flying around are going to deteriorate a lot slower, 50% slower. So that's a great change. The same goes for reduced assault ornithopter wings deterioration rate by 30%, and also increased carrier ornithopter dragonfly speed by 20%. You're also going to get halved carrier ornithopter generator heat buildup speed. So when you're boosting things like that, you're going to be able to do that for a lot longer. One thing that's big for vehicles is we're increasing the overall boost power by 10%, making traversing farther parts of the desert way easier. Also here you slightly get increased boost speeds while in vulture mode for the carrier ornithopter. So overall, the carrier ornithopters getting a huge buff, scout and assault wings getting a huge buff on the deterioration rate, and overall our boost power is getting buffed even more to help with some of the griefing that's going on with ornithopters on ornithopters that are only built specifically to farm. But first, thanks G2A for sponsoring today's video. Now G2A is my go-to place for getting games and software at pretty insane discounts and pretty awesome deals. Now, one thing specifically the G2A stands out on is their seller verification process. I never really have to worry when buying because G2A provides some of the best customer support and has an amazing seller verification process. That means when you buy something, you're buying from a trusted and verified seller that G2A has done an extreme amount of homework on to ensure all of their sellers are completely verified and trustworthy. There is actually an entire business verification process that sellers have to go through just to sell on the site. G2A sellers not only have to fill out 48 different data fields where they have to submit a ton of documentation, provide screenshots to prove they're who they say they are, to make sure that they protect you. G2A puts a large focus on security and seller verification. If you haven't, check out some amazing deals down in the description on G2A.com. Thanks G2A for sponsoring today's video. Let's get back to it. Now your PSU generator tier upgrades now actually have a more noticeable effect on heat stats, meaning our heat reduction I believe is going to increase with some of the higher tier upgrades, so we may get a full vehicle buff from that alone. Now not only that, but assault and carrier ornithopters have actually had their booster speeds updated, and now you're going to be able to actually boost and increase your max vulture speed. They're increasing the time before abandoned vehicles attract sandworms. That's primarily because for the most part, some abandoned vehicles, if you lose connection to the server or something happens, your ornithopter just lands on the sand. Now you have a lot more time to get back into the game, get to your ornithopter, or even if someone shoots you down in the desert. Also, the interaction with Atreides variant scout ornithopters is going to be much easier now to interact with, especially from the rear, meaning if you have to repair certain parts of it, or you're actually trying to get in the ornithopter from behind it, now you can actually do that a lot easier. Another thing is now destroyed vehicle modules will now always pass along any further damage they receive to the chassis of the vehicle. So from my understanding, the chassis can now be specifically damaged, but it will also be damaged if you're in an assault ornithopter. And for instance, you hit a part that then goes to pass it on to, let's say, the front scanner of the vehicle, but there's no front scanner on the vehicle. That damage will go straight to the chassis itself. Ornithopters and other vehicles now will no longer get stuck when the worm is roaming nearby. I believe that's that rubber banding issue that hopefully many of you haven't seen, but I know some of you have, where your ornithopter or something gets stuck in the sand and you can't move, and then you get eaten. So hopefully that isn't a thing anymore. Also, a player now needs to be an owner or co-owner of a vehicle to actually repair vehicle modules. With increased speed, extra damage, assaults, I believe, are going to be the new meta. Obviously, scouts for roaming and even just for rocket use are still perfectly great, but assaults, if you have enough of them with the tankiness and the speed, should be able to outrun basically any vehicle in the game, and also be a powerhouse with rockets if needed. Now, some of the massive deep desert changes, especially for PvE players, are really huge. One of the big things is they've added additional lands to fight over and claim for your bases with more resources being generated. This is in the PvE and PvP area. So those areas right along PvE where you see bases just littered everywhere. Hopefully there's more islands for us to build on that way in the east sector, but also in the PvP zone, because a lot of those islands are pretty spaced out. By adding more of them, you're essentially adding more places that you can drop a small base, but also the important part with the more resources being generated. This means that instead of there being 3 primary big titanium or Stravidian node clusters, there's going to be more kind of medium-sized clusters scattered across the map for a lot of players, both in the PvP and PvE zones, meaning obviously the bigger areas are going to still be in the PvP zone, but now the PvE area should even have a lot more nodes kind of scattered across it in small chunks. That way players can still stay more towards the PvE side of the map. But again, having more islands and more nodes and resources across the entire map in general is going to make farming way easier for a lot of players. So that is a straight W. A big change now is the sandworms in the deep desert now actually have a 50% chance to use their shorter breach version of their animation. And if you're familiar at all, usually when you're farming spice in the DD, you have the long animation. In Haga, you see a lot that the worm actually uses this shorter breach version of the animation, which, if I'm being honest, can make farming spice a lot riskier. Now, this is going to be a much more prevalent thing now in the DD. Now, sometimes that animation will be a lot shorter, and he's going to come straight for you. So keep that in mind, that this shorter breach animation is in the game, and be looking for it because it happens very quickly. Now, they've also added a bunch of UI options here, things like adding a search bar to all the crafting and fabricator menus. That way you don't have to go and guess back and forth which tab something like the Thumper is on. You can just easily search it and filter recipes across all of the categories. They're also adding the deposit all blood and deposit/extract all water buttons to blood purifiers and water cisterns, which will make our lives a lot easier for filling up our leader johns, depositing water, etc. They're also adding new power, water, and storage panels on the sub-fief base management menu, which is going to allow us to see a bunch of extra easily identifiable things about the base and just adds to quality of life. That way you can see a bunch of these different sets very easily on the sub-fief itself. Also, picking up a body is now tapped instead of holding, which by itself is a straight W. For building, they're also fixing Penta shield bases. Now, there are 3 main types that we're really concerned about. Obviously, the big regular Penta shield box. Penta shields are now going to have to be supported by some sorts of walls or pillars specifically, so you can't attach one side of a Penta shield to another side of a Penta shield with this new fix, meaning this eliminates the whole Penta shield box situation. So that's a great W. Another thing is Penta shields now take direct damage, and you're going to be able to visually see it. By shooting the Penta shield, you can actually now see what the damage on the Penta shield is, so you can know how many more rockets or how much more damage you're going to have to do to the Penta shield to actually break it, versus us just shooting randomly in the corner until it hopefully breaks. Also, if you've seen Penta shield bases where they put a Penta shield right in front of a cave and block off the entire cave, before the corners of those were built into the rock, so you couldn't actually destroy them, they were indestructible. Now you can just shoot the Penta shield and break it, and that hopefully should not be a problem anymore. Now, some of the big economy improvements that are also coming to Dune, which some are pretty big ones, is that exchange categories have been reorganized to make them easier, and you can actually now search directly for items in the exchange, meaning you no longer have to go and just hunt down unique schematics by scrolling through the list. You can search them now. They have also redistributed flower sand and spice sand fields, so that way in Haga Basin, so now they no longer sit on areas where they are completely free from the worm. You're actually going to have to contest the worm now for flower sand. Have fun. A big thing here that you need to watch out for is they've increased the volume of rockets and missiles from 0.05 to 0.2, meaning they're going to weigh 4 times as much. So if you're used to carrying 4 stacks of rockets going with you into the deep D like I am, because now 1 stack of rockets or missiles that's 250 is going to cost you 50 volume and take up a lot of space. By doing this, they're eliminating a lot of the ability to carry mass amounts of rockets on you, which I can be down with, even though I love to PvP in this game. because it's going to allow people to not roam around with 1,000 rockets and just go ham for hours upon hours. I think this is a big win for the PvE side of the house. They're also increasing the crafting cost of rockets from 1 duraluminum ingot and 10 fuel cells to 4 duraluminum ingots and 20 fuel cells. So if you want to save on that duralinium, do what we did. Go ahead and craft you like 10 or 50,000 rockets. That way they will last you forever, so that way it doesn't cost you 4x the amount of duraluminum ingots. Also, the icons for small and medium vehicle cells are going to be different than the large vehicle cells now, so you'll be easily able to tell them apart. Another big change that some people might overlook, but is actually extremely significant, is the more attractive items that you can now buy from the vendor at decreased cost. With what I've been doing with Melange Spiced Liquor or Melange Spiced Wine specifically, is already buying that for 4,000 a piece and getting like 100 of them, and then carrying like 30 or 40 on me at any time. That way I can constantly drink them, make sure my spice ability is full up, so when I have to use my spice for whether it be a fight in a vehicle or a PvP ground fight, I always have my spice abilities available because I'm always spiced up because of this. You can go to Arakeen or Harco, for instance, for the vendors, and then go and buy these melange items. That way you can keep them on you and replenish your spice meter constantly. I used to do this for very cheap at 4,000 a wine, but now they're only going to be 800. You can easily buy like 2,000 of these things for not that much money, and then just restock on them and always have your spice available. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The same with a lot of these other things, even like rockets are now only going to cost 200 Solari, as well as plastone and spice fuel cells. So if you ever need to come back and you don't want to farm for that stuff really quickly, you can just go buy them at the vendors and then return to whatever you're doing. Now in the inventory or at the vendor, actual schematics are going to show their actual stats, but now instead of actually having to learn the schematic to be able to hit left alt and see the stats, you're going to be able to see that from the actual schematic itself, which is a big W, because there's nothing worse than learning a recipe and then realizing it sucks. And finally, some huge combat changes that you need to be aware of. The self-healing passive gave less of a bonus than intended, so that's going to be buffed. One big thing here, especially for raiding, they're reducing the power regeneration bonus from source of power from 100% where it's at now to 30%, meaning you're not going to be able to just infinitely spray your lasgun while this thing is active, but it is still going to give you an overall power regeneration bonus and still the best for raiding. This is going to make raiding a little bit harder, make base building in the PvP zone a little bit more useful now that people can't just cut through any base like butter. They fixed the Suspensor Blast ability so you can't just hold it and essentially be invincible. Also, stamina regeneration and power regeneration will actually be blocked while channeling any ability. For instance, like using Suspensor Blast, that is going to block your stamina and power regen completely while you're channeling the ability. And also, for everybody using Cripple Strike, they're fixing an issue with it that actually made it cost twice as much stamina as it actually should. Now when you use it, you shouldn't deplete your entire stamina bar. Now, some big things they're updating with the resources building and crafting in Dune are they're fixing an issue with some of the blooming or the pre-eruption visuals on small and medium spice fields. Before, there were bigger areas that would then explode into a small, etc. Those are now going to match the size of the field that essentially they are to help clarify them. Also, sporadic resources that could not be harvested are now fixed, and by that I believe these small spice fields. Now, in terms of vehicles, another thing is the buggy mining laser is now actually going to be affected by deterioration. Before, it was just infinite health. And overall, with the changes to assault ornithopters, making some of them faster, more viable, making rockets worth more to craft and more to carry, but also scattering resources around the DD a lot more, is really just a win overall for I think the entire game, but especially players that want to play in PvE. And I think that's a big thing, because coexisting between PvE and PvP players is really a tough balance, and if you don't balance it correctly, PvP players will run over all the PvE players, and then those players are going to quit. It's just a matter of fact. So I think this is definitely a W patch, and make sure, especially if you're crafting some of these things, or even so-called using the repair function, I believe that fix is also coming very soon. So if you want to craft some of this stuff, get ahead of it. Now you know, go ahead and build up, get ready for what's coming, save yourself some resources, some time. I think this patch is a big W for Dune. That being said, if you haven't checked out either of these Dune Awakening videos, make sure you check them out so you don't miss out on some awesome stuff.